I would just like to welcome everyone to our post-election analysis brought to you by Springfield Training. For those that don't know me, my name is Dan Howard. I am the Deputy Chief Executive here at Springfield Training, and I have got the most incredible lineup with me today in terms of my panelists. So I'm delighted to be joined by Alex Miles, who is the Managing Director for Yorkshire Learning Providers, Shane Chowen, the Editor at FE Week, Michael Lemin, Head of Policy at educational charity NCFE, Simon Ashworth, Director of Policy and Deputy Chief Executive at the Association of Employment and Learning Providers, and Joseph Lennox, who is the Senior Strategy Advisor at HMRC and also 2023 Apprentice of the Year. So welcome all. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. I really appreciate it. And I know, as many people in the sector, we've not had much sleep. So powered by caffeine this morning, and I really appreciate your time. What I thought I would do is kind of kick off really in terms of initial thoughts. Are we surprised? Have we been expecting this? I was talking to colleagues this morning around the annual apprenticeship conference, and Labour were preparing their shadow government post-election. So I'll open it up to the room really in terms of, are we really surprised? 412 seats is a significant win for Labour. The country have spoken. We are now red.
Yeah.
Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I started my career in FE under a red government, so I'm glad it's back. Personally, I think I'm buzzed. Actually, I'm really excited. It might be the limited sleep and the maximum coffee, but I think because it was called quite quickly, because the manifesto pledges weren't super detailed, I think we've got a brilliant opportunity to shape what is about to come. I think we can talk about what has been inherited. We can talk about solutions. We don't need to. I'm really trying to not focus on looking back at all the awfulness, but actually look forward at all the opportunity and positivity. So I think, and I've just had a meeting. I'm at Ascentis' headquarters today in Lancaster, and I've just had a meeting with the senior leadership team here, and I said, for the first time in the 24 years I've been in FE, I feel like we've got the power to make and shape for the first time. So I'm really buzzed, and I'm pretty sure it's not just the caffeine.
Michael, I see you nodding there. Do you concur?
Yeah, so I don't think it's a surprise. The wonderful polling data that we get these days, and all the statisticians working on it, kind of takes some of the fun out of elections. So it's the margin of error would have been pretty big indeed to say anything other than the majority. But yeah, I agree. I think it's a real opportunity for the government to reinvigorate the relationship with the sector as a whole. It's a really complex area of policy, and there's no simple solutions, but actually we have all the expertise in the sector. And I think by the government engaging, working with people who have different perspectives across the sector, they can affect real change. There's real opportunity to push the dial forward on a lot of the skills challenges that we've had. So cautiously optimistic, I think, is how I'm feeling this morning.
Okay. Joseph, I see you nodding along there. Cautiously optimistic, Mr. Lennox?
Caught me at cautiously optimistic, absolutely. Well, for me, it's a different sort of angle. A lot of young people that have voted this time round would not seen a change in government. And if they did, they would have been incredibly young. I would have been under 10 with no option to vote. 2019 would have been the first time a lot of us voted. So I think for me, there's also extra excitement because as a civil servant, to also see a change in government is incredibly exciting. I've seen sort of some of the gears work. So I think, yeah, for me, optimism in terms of what can be achieved. I think, like you said, Labour have been really stepping up their game, getting ready to step into government. And for example, Sina's been very active in the apprenticeship space. And for me, I'm quite excited to see if she's just as energetic when she gets into the role and she has full control to really make some of those big things she's talking about reality. So for me, yeah, cautiously optimistic, but also very excited to be part of that red wave, I guess. It's not something that I've seen before in an election. So yeah, looking forward to what we can do and what can be.
Thank you. Shane, anything to add? Obviously, you've been up all night. You've been feeding the education ecosystem with updates throughout the night. So thank you. Appreciate you being here. Any surprises for you?
Yeah, well, I guess I've had maybe a bit longer to sort of digest what's been going on overnight, and there's a few things that I share everyone's cautious optimism, but there are a few things that I am a little bit worried about. If I get the sort of political stuff out the way first, as Lennox rightly says, this would be for a lot of young people, this would be the first general election that they voted in. Some of the initial polling that's coming out shows that a lot of young people voted for Labour, which isn't a surprise. A lot of young people voted for Reform as well. Yeah. In a lot of constituencies. So we, as people that work with young people, I do think need to watch out for that on campus in terms of where young people are getting their information from, how we deal with that in the classroom and in workshops and lecture theatres. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I'm also a little bit concerned about the Labour Party with such a huge majority. I think there's huge opportunities for infighting, for divisions. I foresee huge rows with the mayors if they don't get what they want around devolution in the future, possible splits over some really crunch issues. Israel Gaza was a huge doorstep issue, which unseated Jonathan Ashworth in Leicester, which was a huge surprise. Big Labour figures like Wes Streeting, their majorities were very, very, very narrow in constituencies with high Muslim populations. So it's not going to be an easy ride politically for Keir Starmer managing the politics of the Labour Party and also the House of Commons. And I was trying to think of what the tagline for this Labour government would be. Obviously, in '97, we had New Labour. And where I keep landing on this one, Dan, is broke Labour. So I don't mean
Labour.
Skint Labour. That's a good one because they've got no money. Yeah. And so we can get very, very excited about the energy behind this movement for change that Keir Starmer is understandably trying to inject into a otherwise quite depressed nation. Yeah. But one of the first things Bridget Phillipson's going to have to do is do a submission for a budget, and we know that within the Department for Education's budget, there's a huge chunk of that which is unprotected, which people like the Institute for Fiscal Studies is earmarked for between 18 and 19 billion pounds worth of baked in cuts that have already been agreed. So I'm quite nervous about that.
Yeah. And the recovery of the economy is going to take some very bold decisions, and they will be felt across the nation, regardless of age or political party. We're going to see some significant shift, aren't we? And I think we need to be mindful and prepared for that. Simon, then just coming to you, I guess you've been preparing like the rest of us in terms of a Labour government. Any thoughts from an AELP perspective?
I think it's fairly safe that Labour were going to get in. A lot of the discussion's been about the size of the majority. I mean, they have got a huge majority, but they've also got quite a narrow margin in a lot of areas, and I think that's probably a good thing, that as Shane says, they will have a lot of power, but there'll be a lot of pressure to deliver quickly. And if they don't, as we've seen, we kind of move into quite a swing electorate, I think. So I think that's probably one of the few things that might be able to hold Labour's feet to the fire about change and the pace of change. Is some of the more kind of fine margins in some of those areas. So I think that's really important. Turnout was low. I mean, it was 60%, which was about 8% down. Yeah. I mean, just picking up what Shane was saying, I think Reform UK came second in 90 constituencies, but got four seats. Yeah. They got 15% of the vote. Liberal Democrats got 13% of the vote and got over 70 seats. So it's quite interesting, isn't it, about how our electoral system works and where you put your chips. But Labour only got 35% of the vote. So it's a lot of challenges ahead have been spelled out by others. But I think what we all expected in terms of the outcome of the election, but some kind of key messages in there as well about the priorities of and the voting patterns of the population and the need for change at pace. How you're going to balance that with some of the economic challenges, I think, is going to be really, really critical.
Thank you. Shane, you mentioned earlier, so Bridget Phillipson, potential education secretary. I don't know if he's there yet or still on his way to the palace. In terms of Sir Keir Starmer, to meet King Charles. He'll be appointing his first cabinet probably later on today, and Bridget Phillipson is there in the spotlight as a new education secretary. What do you think her immediate priorities should be?
Good question. Like I mentioned, so there's a budget in September with Rachel Reeves probably as the first woman shadow as the first woman chancellor, which we should celebrate as a country. The fact that we finally got one. It shouldn't have taken this long, but we finally got a woman in the Treasury, running the Treasury, which is fantastic. So there's that to be getting on with. There are lots of immediate priorities. I know that level 3 qualifications, making a decision on level 3 is on the urgent decision list.
In terms of like the reforms and defunding.
Around the defunding reforms. Obviously, we as the further education sector would like to know what's going on, but more importantly, there are kids leaving year 9 going into year 10, leaving year 10 going into year 11 with a very complicated landscape ahead of them if they can work out how to piece together one of these new study programs if they don't want to do a T-level, So they've got a lot of decisions to make in that respect. We also know that there's lots of pressure from the schools world too. We've got to remember on Bridget Phillipson and her new team around school teacher pay in particular. So one of the other urgent decisions is what to do about the pay award for school teachers. That has an impact on our sector because the Association of Colleges have said they won't recommend a pay award for college teachers until they know what the schools are getting, and then they're going to have a row with the new government to make sure that that's matched. As we know, there's a 9K pay gap between college teachers and school teachers. That gap is bigger in the ITP sector. That gap is even, and then the gap is even bigger between the schools and the prison education sector. So teacher pay, huge issue. And then I think there's a King's speech on the 17th of July. And I reckon there will be a line in there about a bill to replace the apprenticeship levy with the skills and growth levy. There is some legislative underpinning behind the apprenticeship levy, and you might as well get that out of the way in the first King's speech. And then off the back of that, we will need to have a debate as a sector about what the non-apprenticeship training side of the new skills and growth levy needs to look like. I know that there's awarding organisations running over themselves to work out what their offer would be for that, those sort of smaller modular courses linked to sectors, linked to economic growth. So I think there's going to be lots of angling from that side of things going on. And I also wouldn't necessarily guarantee that Seema Malhotra will be the shadow skills minister. One interesting fact about our constitution is that you're only allowed a certain amount of ministers. And Keir Starmer has too many shadow ministers to be able to appoint to be ministers. So one easy way to solve that would be to link the FE and the HE shadow ministerial roles, because it's currently 2 people. Used to be 1, and it could be 1 again. So it could be Seema Malhotra, it could be Matt Weston, who's currently the shadow HE minister, or it could be someone else completely. I did notice over the election campaign, Seema wasn't really doing any sort of FE skills apprenticeships campaigning. I noticed other shadow ministers were sort of really promoting and hammering home their messages around their briefs. Seema really didn't do that very much, so maybe she doesn't want the job either.
It's going to be a tough one. So yeah, interesting. We've mentioned the changes to the apprenticeship levy, and obviously it was in the Labour manifesto around the growth and skills levy. I've had question come in around insights on Labour's plans for reform and the defunding of qualifications. So Michael, as a qualification awarding body and endpoint assessment organisation, 175 years old, it would be good to kind of get your thoughts really around what do we need to do to prepare ourselves for changes in the apprenticeship levy and other forms of training under what will be a new Skills England.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So I agree with what Shane said, and the timing of the election, I think is potentially a real gift to the sector in that it affords Labour time to stop the defunding before August the 1st this year. We've got 3 weeks or so now. and that will avoid some massive unintended consequences. I think that, principally we'd see a rise in NEET cohort, we'd see low achievement rates, and I think it'll damage the long-term success of T levels. NCFE have a massive stake in T levels, so we want them to succeed in the long term, but it doesn't feel like the sector's ready. Work placement availability, and Shane published a great story last week about the kind of safety net. People who drop out of T levels go on to the courses that are being cut. If we take that safety net away, what are people going to do? So cannot understate the urgency of a quick decision on that qualification review. And I know there's a lot of people in the sector, working with the Labour team on that. So, we'll really be looking for that quick decision there as well. I think whilst there is kind of immediate decisions to make on things like that, a lot of the other stuff in the manifesto is going to take time, and they should take the time to get it right. And the skills and growth levy is absolutely one of those things. So, every time you change something, there's unintended consequences that will pop up elsewhere. And, we have to be really, really careful when changing the levy. So, you can understand why they've done it. Big business, CBI and others have lobbied really hard for employers to have more flexibility. And it's those levy paying employers that, will benefit from those other forms of training. So, as a sector, there might be opportunities in certain areas it depends what else is funded through that. We don't have the details. So it's, HTQs, for example, is there an opportunity to fund HTQs through that? And what levers are they going to apply to that to ensure that actually, if you put it all in the hands of employers, are they going to make decisions that will benefit, learners across the UK? I'm not so sure. We've seen a real rise. Almost half of all apprenticeships go to over 25s now. If we kind of allow people to spend, there's a risk that we'll see fewer apprenticeships, but there are levers that you can apply to that. So for example, does the non-levy budget become restricted or incentivized at lower levels or at lower age groups? As an example of that, do we only allow people to kind of have a finite number of level 6 or 7 apprenticeships, or do we make that in proportion, to the number of apprentices that have at level 2 and 3, for example? So there's various things that they can do in that, and I think they should take the time to consult, do some economic modelling on how that might look at the other side of things, because if it's just a blunt instrument, we allow people to have that full flexibility. I think it could result in fewer apprenticeships overall. And we need to be really careful that the training that is available and funded through that other 50% is the right training in the right sectors that are needed in the economy as well.
Amazing. No, I agree completely. Joseph, as a former apprentice and winner of the Apprentice of the Year award in 2023, within the Labour manifesto, it said they were going to guarantee training in terms of apprenticeships and helping people find work aged 18 to 21-year-olds. What are your thoughts in terms of the potential impact on someone who may want to do an apprenticeship or may have to navigate a different route in terms of the lack of funds available if they do introduce the restrictions on the apprenticeship?
Yeah, it's a really messy landscape, I must admit, and I don't envy young people nowadays, because before, we used to beat the drum of uni's not the way anymore, and I'm happy we have loads of options. But I think the options have become confusing somewhat. And I think where we've struggled with apprenticeships to sell that message of what an apprenticeship can do, I think we still haven't finished that area, and we've jumped to other areas. So you've now got to explain T levels to potential parents as well. And again, that's one of the barriers as a young person. It's very hard. And I speak to a lot of young people. We had work experience at HMRC last week, where I really asked them, what is the issue? What are the issues you guys are facing? And they still say, we don't know. So we're giving loads of opportunities to students. But if they're not the opportunities students want or understand how to get from A to B, we're just flooding the landscape a little bit too much for those students. But for me, I value apprenticeships because I've seen the life-changing value of apprenticeships. I love the idea of T levels and really moving away from this academic sort of style of learning, giving that more employer-led sort of work-based learning. I think that's where we need to go, absolutely. But I think one of the areas we have is the demand is nowhere near sorry, the supply doesn't match the demand. We still have loads of students who want to get into apprenticeships but still can't, and I think that's the area we need to work more on, is, like you say, getting employers to go, right, let's not just look at upskilling those 25-year-olds, let's look at entry. And I think the incentives we need to look at is how do we really push employers to change their view of young people. And you know, even now, I'm going to sit here and say, even as a 23-year-old with, I'd say, some good experience, hopefully under my belt, it's still quite a challenge as a young person to still find the right career. So for me, I don't envy young people today. It's a really messy field. I don't think there's enough information out there, even as an individual, to make an informed decision. More importantly, I don't think the support networks for those students have enough information. So schools, for example, and most importantly, parents and families back home. I was really lucky enough that my mum supported my decision, but I've met so many students who say they're going to uni because it's what their parents still know and it's what their parents still want them to do. So we still need to jump a few steps back in that campaign of changing the word apprenticeship, changing what further education looks like, and not just going, right, higher education and apprenticeships are the only thing you can do, but really giving that landscape that is easily navigatable and easily understandable. That's where we struggle with, because I couldn't explain it to a young person today. It's very hard to understand.
Yeah. It's the navigation, isn't it, of what is quite a complex education system. And it's about making sure they have got the right information to make an informed choice about what's right for them, their career, their future. So I concur completely. I'm just going to remind the audience to please submit questions into the chat for the panel. We will be coming to you shortly to open up for questions. Alex, as a strong representative of the North, and you know the leader of Yorkshire Learning Providers, I wanted to just come to you around devolution, if I may, and the devolved skills powers, because you know, Labour are wanting to make sure devolution is high on the agenda. They're promising local areas will gain new powers in terms of adult education, skills, and employment support. So I was wondering kind of your initial thoughts on that. What does that mean for local regions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it wouldn't be a surprise that a regional network is welcoming greater devolution and more access to skills being, you know, devolved, and more access to a plethora of devolution that supports skills. We know what works best for us in the regions. You know, Westminster shouldn't be deciding what happens in Lancaster, where I am today, or Leeds, where I'm based. So the more devolution, the better. I think it needs to be better focused in terms of alignment to industry need and LMI, and meeting that kind of industrial and economic needs. But I think us in the regions and us regional networks, we are inherently aware of, on a daily basis, the difference that FE and skills makes. We don't need to go out and do mass surveys or data gathering. We know it, we live and breathe it every day. So I think the more it can be focused, the more we can showcase and unlock potential in regions, the better. I think the beauty of Labour coming in is that they are inherently, you know, their ideology is all about public services and, you know, social inclusion and social mobility. So I'm hopeful that we can see greater devolution in a way that really supports industry, education, and the kind of economic priorities of the regions. And we feel that we are best placed to help shape that as regional networks. And we are, you know, for you, Dan, we are the representative voice for the independent training providers and the colleges in our region. And we are, the letters are already written to the MPs in terms of what we think.
Stamps are on.
Yeah, I've already written them. I just need to insert name here to the MPs. But yeah, I'm for it. I think we know what's best for our regions and our residents and our employers. I welcome the opportunity to have those discussions at a regional and local level, and make sure that all the right people are in those rooms, and it's not being done to us, but it's being done with us. And I'm hopeful that will be the case. And also, really importantly, we do have a disconnect between central and local. We need better connectivity. We need better connectivity between the regions. Hopefully Skills England, whatever it might look like, will provide that connectivity and that conduit to be a much better alignment, and recognising that what regions need are unique to those regions. I'm personally glad Gillian Keegan lost her seat, because she didn't recognise that there was a lack of social mobility. She didn't recognise that the benefit system was a huge barrier to people starting apprenticeships.
She wasn't an apprentice herself. I don't know if you knew that.
What?
She was an apprentice herself, if you didn't know that.
No, well, I know you could do an awesome drinking game out of her saying how many times she's an apprentice. You would be levered, but so yeah, so but there is, and it is worse in the north than it is in the south. It's not comparable. We know that it is a huge barrier, and that the government that are leaving us today did not do enough to recognise that and support that. And then the other massive issue that I think Devo needs to sort, but it's not currently in their remit, is NEETs. We have got a growing, Labour are about to inherit a shocking young
population
issue in terms of NEETs and not known, study programme provision not fit for purpose, local provision not mapped to local need. And I think devolution should be able to access that, but obviously they're 19 plus and don't necessarily look below that. But I think there's an opportunity for us to address that at a local level, not at a national level.
Thank you. Amazing. Go Yorkshire. Simon, if I can come to you on Skills England. So the bringing together of business, training providers, unions, national, local government. How quickly do you think that could manifest itself? Obviously, we have IFATE at the moment, the Institute for Apprenticeships, Technical Education. They're making cuts. We've seen that publicised through FE Week. Thank you, Shane. Skills England. What? Why? When? How? What are your thoughts?
Well, Skills England is going to be pivotal in this new agenda moving forward. Labour have talked about a post-16 skills plan. That's really important. We need a joined approach. I think with Skills England, there's likely to be a change in legislation to kind of bring that forward. Shane's already talked about the King's Speech. Will it be in that, or will it take a bit longer? It's quite a crowded space when you look at DFE, you look at IFA, at the SFA and others, and the costings that Labour put together for Skills England represent potentially a significant organisation. I think when this first started, it seemed to be almost a board or a representative sort of group. I think Labour have budgeted up to £50 million for Skills England. I think IFATE's budget is about 35 million. So it's substantial, and I don't necessarily think there'll be room for both. From what we've read and what we've seen about Skills England, I could see it easily probably consuming parts of IFATE generally. I think it'll probably include bits of DFE, thinking about the future skills unit within DFE. So there could be definitely a bit of a shake-up in terms of the architecture of the system. So you could see possibly with IFATE, funding might go back into DFE. Will assessment go to Ofqual? Will that kind of bit around coalescing employers and content and standards kind of move into Skills England? But Skills England going to be a really important piece in the skills system. I think it was pleased to see that Labour talked about the types of organisations involved in Skills England. They could have easily just talked about colleges. They talked about training providers, which I think is good. It's
sometimes
easy to fall into that kind of narrative. So, how that's going to be put together, who's going to be on the governing board, what the focus is, how quickly, Skills England also have powers around thinking about those flexibilities around the apprenticeship levy as well. So it's going to be a really important organisation. I think it'll take a bit of time for Skills England to kind of come together. I don't think it will be
not an immediate thing, no.
Not an immediate thing. I'll just go back to one other point. It's sometimes important about what's not in the manifesto as what is in the manifesto. And one of the big things not in the manifesto was a reference to the 50-50 skills and growth levy. Manifestos tend to be quite vague, which gives you a bit more room to manoeuvre. As we all probably know, that there isn't a massive underspend on the apprenticeship programme budget. It's been 98% spent over the last couple of years. I think it's probably even more spent when the sort of figures come out for the most current year. So 50-50 at the time, back in 21 or wherever it was when there was a big underspend, was you could see where that kind of come from. So we generally have just seen a narrowing of what flexibilities potentially look like. Labour have talked about a pre-apprenticeship programme. They've talked about traineeships. That's the trying to get more young people into apprenticeships is a good thing, and in flexibilities, they've talked more about modularization and, upskilling adults and maintaining competency. So we've really seen a bit of a narrowing, I think, about the weird and wonderful that the apprenticeship levy was going to fund in this future landscape, recognizing that there's not much money to play with at the moment. And if you dilute the apprenticeship offer, we'll have fewer apprentices, and no one wants that. So bit of a sort of shifting of the sand. Labour need to get in, they need to look at the books, they need to understand the system, they need to work at pace, but they also need to make sure we evolve the system and make it better, not damage the system that we've got. So that'd be my view anyway.
And as a sector, we are very vocal in terms of what works well. We're not shy in terms of giving viewpoints and opinions to anyone who will listen, in terms of being on the ground, understanding the nuances that come from different aspects of the education system. Alex, I completely take on board your point around the NEET issue, and that is going to need some significant work and investment to address. I'm going to start now bringing questions in from our audience, and as I bring them in, please let me know who wants to take that. So I've got one here, which is, do you think plans for the new British Baccalaureate will now be scrapped? Who wants to take that one?
Yes.
Okay.
They're inherently Tory, why wouldn't they? I assume that they'll come up with something else, as will T-levels are Tory and boot camps are Tory. So I can see some shift in some of the policies, but I can't see that being a thing we need to be too concerned about right now.
So I think they will. I hope anyway and I hope they're getting this advice, that they keep the good bits from the advanced British standard and lose the not so good bits. The not so good bits being, for me anyway, the name. Awful. So I think the good bits are the higher funding rates and more teaching for 16 to 19-year-olds. 16 to 19-year-olds in this country get absolutely ripped off compared to the volume of access to teaching and learning that their counterparts get in other countries on study program equivalent courses. We absolutely should be offering more teaching and learning experiences, plus enrichment, because that's gone, and that should be a priority to bring back in our classrooms for our young people. But for goodness sake, get rid of that rubbish name.
Another question is around changes to the apprenticeship minimum wage. So do you think that the apprenticeship wage needs to be changed to encourage more people into an apprenticeship?
I think the apprenticeship for 16 to 19-year-olds, the whole thing that their employed status needs reviewing. I think the whole, if they're 16 to 18-year-olds, it should be seen as an education pathway. Therefore, it should be comparable to schools and colleges. Therefore, parents don't lose their benefits. And it shouldn't be, so the whole employment thing around 16 to 18-year-olds, I think needs reviewing. We've been lobbying for that for years, recognising that 16 to 18-year-olds, it shouldn't be employed status. It should have parity to school and college.
Liberal Democrats, didn't they? I'm sure it was Liberal Democrat manifesto which said they wanted to scrap the lower apprenticeship rate and ensure that people are paid at least the national minimum wage.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I'd absolutely agree. And that's not just for young people, that's for all ages. I work with prisons to talk to them about prison apprenticeships, and they think that they'll have to go in on the apprenticeship minimum wage. There's just a real misconception, and it's just not right that there is even a thing called the apprenticeship minimum wage. You're either employed and a contributor, or it shouldn't be an employment programme, it should be an education programme for the younger ages. So I'd agree with that. And I like that we've got more Lib Dems that have got seats, because I think that will hold Labour to account. I'm not loving that we've got Farage in our ecosystem, but Reform and Lib Dem will hold Labour to account on some of these public service and social aspects. And I think that could be one that Lib Dem will really hold them to task on.
Okay, interesting.
Just to comment on this as well, there's other things around this. So, this isn't a comment. I agree with everything Alex has said, but if we do raise that apprenticeship minimum wage, it stands to reason there will be fewer apprenticeships on offer, because some employers just won't offer those opportunities. But there's other kind of things here, gaps between the DWP and the DFE. So, for example, if you start an apprenticeship at 16 or 17, your parents will lose their child benefit, yet you're still being paid £6.40 instead of an actual living wage. So like it's kind of a double impact on those young people. So we have to make it easier, for those young people taking those apprenticeship and for their families to be able to support them through that as well. So there's different things we can do. And I was glad to see Joseph's hand go up there because he's got very recent experience of being an apprentice, and I'm really interested in his view.
100%. Good segue, Joseph.
If I jump in there, yeah, thank you. Absolutely important point. The apprenticeship sort of wage creates that pay discrimination, which is very hard as a young person going into an industry because you already feel like you have to prove your worth because you're not being paid the same as other colleagues. So that really makes it difficult for someone going into that industry. I was quite lucky that the civil service didn't do that. So it was one of the only apprenticeships I found when I was looking that actually paid you the same grade as if anyone the same grade, if anyone was on the same level of you without the apprenticeship scheme. So you had that. And honestly, it's one thing I've always said I've really appreciated as being an apprentice is I don't feel that, that pay discrimination to almost say you're not quite there yet as a full colleague. And I think that that's what gave me a lot of empowerment in the workplace because I knew, right, I'm not being paid less because I'm an apprentice. I'm getting paid the same. Massive. But just behind that as well, I think we need to look at the offer that uni still gives you, that independent lifestyle, the uni life, all that lovely stuff, living outside of your house, going to live in the uni accommodation, that is still a huge factor for young people. And the apprenticeship wage doesn't offer that. To be honest, it doesn't really give you that independence. And I was quite lucky that, I moved out at 18 on my apprenticeship and I had a very good wage to support that.
Yeah.
But if you as a young person want that independence that uni offers you, but you're getting a wage that doesn't allow you to live that sort of freedom and that lifestyle, it makes it very difficult. And that's one of the issues that a lot of people go to uni. You ask them, and it's not for the qualification, it's not for the great, lovely graduation at the end and all that. A lot of them still say it's the uni life, that social aspect. And I think we should be able to offer that with a really good wage. But I accept what Michael says is if you do that, you might reduce the amount of apprenticeships out there.
Yeah.
And I think that is the difficult part of it, isn't it? It's that give and take sort of relationship where if you get more money, you might reduce the amount out there. But that does mean that the apprenticeships out there technically are better, higher paying apprenticeship schemes. But with the issue, it is. And I think for me, I think this is a huge part. And whenever I go to speak about apprenticeship schemes, I always say you need to make that apprenticeship scheme as attractive as possible. And I think when you start looking at, let's start changing the wage for an apprentice, it creates that, you might as well go to uni because you see they're not really going to pay you much money as an apprentice. And I think that's where we're still going wrong a little bit. But yeah, that would be from my personal experience as an apprentice.
Thank you. Earlier this week, I think it was the BBC who published that they said 1.8 million people owe £50,000 or more in terms of student debt. And one of the questions from the audience is, do you think the burden of student debt on young people following university will be considered under a new Labour government? Who wants to go first?
I can jump in first on this if you want. So both Labour and the Conservatives in their manifestos, this might be my journalism cynical hat, but they both put some lines in about higher education and universities that I think were vague enough to give candidates on the doorstep something to talk about whenever tuition fees was raised, but no party wanted to go anywhere near the issue of university tuition fees because the moment that Bridget Phillipson or Keir Starmer mentions tuition fees, they know it's going to dominate the headlines because middle-class newspaper editors will then do 3 pages on it that, you just saw what happened with VAT on private schools, affects a very, very small number of families that got lots and lots of coverage. The same thing would happen with tuition fees. So I do think this is, again, for Bridget, is going to be a medium-term priority. I can see there being a review of some kind again, like there was in the 2010s. I think university finances are a mess, and in many ways, universities are where sort of FE colleges were about 10 years ago. investigations into subcontracting, an insolvency regime sort of being developed under the surface. No political party is going to want a university going bust on their watch. So yeah, they absolutely do need to look at this. And also, but as Joseph said earlier, I think young people and families are just becoming much more savvy about their options, and that's why it's so important that apprenticeships for young people are, one, prioritized again, and active government intervention is put in place to increase the volume and the proportion, but secondly, that they are well-paying jobs. And I agree with Alex that there does need to be a settlement on, are they students or are they workers? I'd probably land on the other side of the argument than Alex did. I'd probably want to argue that they are and should be treated as workers, and you'd sort the rest of the systems out behind that. But that would be a huge opportunity, I think, to really revolutionize the options open to young people who, as I say, are just being way more skeptical about that whole university experience.
Okay, Michael, bring you in there.
Yeah, I'll be brief, Dan. I think I mean, in response to the question, I think what they'll do is they won't do much on this. They'll kick the can down the road, and it's a ticking time bomb for a future government. At some point, we will have to deal with this. Nearly half of those student loans will never be paid back in full. So, you know, there's a huge public finance issue apart from anything else, as well as that kind of, you know, question about worth for learners choosing that path as well. A good indication will be what Labour do with the lifelong loan entitlement, the LLE. So when the legislation went through Parliament, they abstained on the vote and they've kept their options open here. But really, you know, that HE finance is in serious need of an overhaul. If they don't do the LLE, it's back to the drawing board, another 5 years, 6 years of legislation going through before we see a change. And really, what other options are there? Graduate tax is that much different anyway. So my best guess, and it is a guess because we don't know, is that Labour will support the LLE and take it forward, but that'll be a good indication of their stance on loans. I don't think there's a lot of noise about it at the moment as well. You know, so it's almost kind of been accepted societally. It'll come back in future, but it doesn't feel like a kind of hot potato at the moment.
Okay, I'm conscious of time and it flies when you're having fun. So I want to do a quick round response from each of you, if that's okay. So Keir Starmer has said, you know, change begins now. What is the first change that you would like to see within the world of further education and skills? I'm going to start with Simon.
Well, I think what I want is not necessarily what would happen. They're two different things, but I mean, we've put forward sort of you know, what we think are 5 things that should happen in the first 100 days. I'll kind of cheat a little bit and give sort of 2 of those. One is we'd like to see from the start of the new financial year the receipts from the apprenticeship levy kind of align with the apprenticeship programme budget, and that would allow lots more starts, better rates, more flexibilities. And our other big sort of immediate ask really is to think about Maths and English exit policy on apprenticeships. It would sort of turbocharge achievement rates. It would help remove sort of entry restrictions for apprentices. And I think it would mean that a lot more learners could go through, get competent and progress on in their learning. So they're 2 things that I would love them to do, PDQ, but they've also got a long list of things they've got to do as well. But that'd be our 2, I'd say.
Thank you. Alex?
Well, obviously, I'm going to say the NEETs because that's kind of my passion piece at the moment. But I actually think there's not necessarily what we want them to do, but what we need to do as a sector. And I think they've got everything to do and prove now. So I think we need to be loud, be proud, showcase, celebrate. You know, what we do in FE is magic, and we need to take responsibility for letting Labour know that. So I think that's what we need to do in our first 100 days of a Labour government, be loud, be proud, and showcase our wins and our successes. And then hopefully from that, there'll be some positive rhetoric coming out of the back of it. So I'm going to turn it slightly on its head and say what I think we need to do as a sector.
Thank you. Joseph, change begins now. What would you like to see?
Oh, I don't really like that question, I must admit, because there's a lot that needs to be done and there's no money to do it, so that's a big problem. For me, I'll be honest, I'll stick to what I know best, and it is provision for young people. out of sixth form, out of GCSEs. It is incredibly disheartening to speak to young people who really want to do apprenticeship schemes, and there's just not that many out there for them. I also really want to get that education back. I think we need to start sharing more about the landscape that we're offering, because it's like we spoke about, it's too confusing. And I think if we nail that, so students know exactly what they can do, what works for them and what doesn't work, then you start to find out what the specific problems are for those provisions that you're offering. But at the moment, where you have so many in such a very confusing way, it doesn't help in even us as understanding, so what is nailing and what isn't, because most students would tell you we don't have a clue how to navigate this world. So I think if we can build that pathway into these different routes, you then create that, okay, well, we might see apprenticeships are absolutely fantastic. We might say, oh, T levels didn't work out the way that we wanted them to. We need to tweak them here and there. And I think that will provide the information you need, if students have the understanding. But I think that's a big ask, because you have to target students, you have to target schools, and like I say, you have to target the parents back home as well, so everyone has that information to really understand what the landscape is.
Thank you. Michael, you're on mute. Very 2020.
I got nearly to the end of the webinar and I slept on the banana skin right at the end. So yeah, I'm going to go with three, what I think are, we've talked a lot today about the complex things and the difficult things to get through. I think there's three things, some of which are in the manifesto, that are quite easy and will result in quick wins. The first being the pausing of that defunding, which we've talked about earlier. Don't think it's the Reform Progress 8, and I think that's a bit of a tweak to an existing policy that could have huge impact. We'd see more creative and vocational subjects on the curriculum in schools, which will mean that people arrive better prepared for vocational study in colleges afterwards. And the other thing is, do something about GCSE resit policy, because it's a hugely damaging policy and it's a very quick thing to fix.
Would have a very positive impact as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, Shane.
Just breaking news. Keir Starmer has shaken hands and they've done what they need to do, and he's officially the Prime Minister. Also, the last two digit of his registration plate is FE on his government jag. So
well, there we go. We're winning already.
Well done, everyone. Well done. Impact. We've made it. So I'll do something slightly different. Teachers. I think we need to strike a new deal with the teaching profession as a country. We are in a situation where we can't run courses because we can't find teachers. There's skills people need to learn, but we can't find the people to teach them. So we need to absolutely work out a way of paying teachers more money. But as another part of that new deal for teachers has to be modernizing the profession. We need to be at the forefront as a country in the world on the use of AI in education. Stop teachers doing things they don't need to do, because there's good tools out there to support them to do the admin, some of the boring bits of assessment that takes up a lot of time that AI is going to be able to do in the future. So I think we desperately need to strike a new deal with the teaching profession. It never really features very high up in policy documents. There's always like maybe a very small chapter at the end of a white paper on professionalizing teachers and giving ETF some money for some CPD programs for some teachers in some parts of the sector. We need a proper go at it. So that would be mine.
Okay. Perfectly on time. So I just want to extend a massive thank you to all of you. I know you're tired. You've been up most of the night, and I really appreciate you giving us some of your time and wisdom in terms of the outcome of the general election. I want to thank our audience for joining us today. Really appreciate you giving us some time. This is our first ever live broadcast here at Springfield Training, so thank you for being a part of that. And I wish you all a very pleasant day and wonderful weekend. Hopefully the weather will be pleasant and we can all enjoy the football with a beer and some sunshine. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And we will get this broadcast posted out on all of our socials as well.